Hey everybody, so today we have another film match in Lightroom. Let's dive in and take a look. Here are the photos that we're going to be working with today. This is from a wedding I photographed a few weeks back. And the film scan on the left here was shot on the Contax 645 with the Zeiss 80mm f2, which is my preferred medium format camera system. And on the right here, I'll go ahead and show you the settings. This was shot with the Sony A1 with a 28-70 f2. The film was developed and scanned by Richard Photolab. And this is how the scan looked when they delivered it to me. And this is the scan after my editing. So I kind of just cooled it off a little bit and added a little bit more magenta to give it almost a more neutral look. This to me just felt a little bit too warm and green for my taste. And now we're going to use this scan to make our edits here. Starting with this digital image, I'm going to crop it to a similar crop. So I'm just going to take a look here at our crop. The bottom left-hand corner, we can kind of see the crop here. It's a 4:3 aspect ratio. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the aspect ratio to 4:3. And then I'm going to crop into roughly the same kind of framing that we have in the film scan. That to me looks pretty similar. Shift R to bring up our reference view, and then I'm going to drag our film scan here. And now you can see that our crop matches up and we have a relatively similar image to work with. If you watched the last video, I used M6 to edit my digital file, and I'm gonna do the same here. This is the M6 profile from the Goodlight presets Eric McVeigh pack, the original pack. I think it's pack 4. Here are all the packs from Goodlight. The one that I use is pack 4 Eric McVeigh. These are my favorites. He actually released pack 6, which is a little bit more kind of like editorial, a little more digital feeling. The pack 4 is a little bit more film feeling. So I actually feel like pack 4 is a little bit better for my work since I am matching visual images to the film scan. So I'm going to start with the M6 profile. And just like last time, I'm going to decrease the opacity of this profile to 60%. And I'm also going to raise our exposure just to get these a little bit more even. Okay, so we've adjusted the profile and we've adjusted the exposure, and now we're going to adjust the white balance. I kind of like to generally just start by selecting auto white balance and seeing what Lightroom will do, because a lot of the time it does a good job. I'm gonna raise up the exposure slightly. And like I said last time, I'm always tweaking. By far, most of the changes in the digital image happens in the basic panel. Those are the sliders that I'm constantly checking in with and tweaking as I edit this image, and everything else is like more secondary. So another thing I like to do is just decrease the contrast. So I'm gonna bring down the contrast slider to -10. And then I'm going to just bring down the highlights, bring up the shadows. This further helps with contrast. I like to add a little bit of texture and a little bit of clarity to sort of match the texture of the film scan. Also, zooming in and looking at these side by side really helps. I like to get them at a zoom level where they feel really similar so I can sort of take a look at what's happening. So obviously these are not matching up quite yet, but we're getting closer. So I'm gonna leave the rest of these settings the same for now. I might drop the vibrance just a little bit, and already it's starting to match up nicely. Tone curve is another area that I don't touch that much, but you can use it to sort of help further cut the contrast. So I'm just gonna do that here, and I'll probably leave it at that. I might come back to tone curve. And the next major panel here is color grading. So I like to kind of take a look at our image and try to figure out what the overall color shifts are. So I feel like we could add a little bit of warmth in the shadows and a little bit, maybe cooling down even the highlights a bit, and a little bit of warmth, maybe even green to the midtones. Okay, so I'm just kind of tweaking here. I've added a little bit of like this yellow green to the shadows and a little bit of that same sort of hue to the midtones. I'm not always like super precise with this. I'm sort of just experimenting with which hues look good, and I'm keeping the saturation at around 5 for each of them. For the highlights, I find that sometimes film scans benefit from adding a little bit of pink or magenta to the highlights, just because oftentimes the Noritsu scanner kind of gives you that sort of look. So I've added that here. I feel like our digital image is a little bit too warm when compared with the film scan. So I'm going to further decrease the white balance to sort of combat that. And I'm going to bring up the tint a little bit. And now these are looking quite similar, I would say. There's just a few tweaks I might make to certain colors. So as you can see here in the background, some colors are more saturated in the film scan than in our digital image. So this is where you can look at the color mixer to sort of make these more specific hue adjustments. So I like to use the dropper here when there's a color kind of like this that I'm not really sure what it is. And I'm going to start with saturation and just drag up the saturation of this hue here. I'm going to continue to look at the background and just kind of continue to tweak here. And you can use a similar technique with the hue by using this color selector to sort of adjust the hues of the image here. This door especially is feeling a little bit more green. So I'm just going to add in some of that right here, and I might go back to saturation. So with all of these panels, it's making constant adjustments until we start seeing the tones feel more similar. And now I'm coming back to the basic panel and making a few more tone adjustments here, dropping down the highlights so we see all of the detail in the dress here, bring up the shadows to further cut the contrast, and constantly adjusting white balance to match our skin tones. And to be honest with you, this looks pretty close. The door in the back is not quite matching with the film scan, but other than that, it feels very similar, and I'm not necessarily too concerned about this area. I feel like they're starting to live in the same kind of realm, and that's the goal that I'm ultimately after. So if we look at a before and an after, before, after. So we can see that these photos, if you're just looking at them sort of side by side, like you wouldn't necessarily tell the difference right off the bat. One thing I might do is the skin isn't exactly feeling the same. I'm not exactly sure if it's saturation. I don't really like desaturating skin tones very much. So I probably want to go less than -10, which is kind of where we were. We can also try luminance and just bring down the luminance slightly, which sometimes can help with film scans as well. Like that to me looks a little closer just by dropping the luminance slightly. I think -24 is probably too much. So I'll just bring this to like maybe -12. And that looks fairly similar. If you wanted to, you could also add some grain to this. I don't usually do that, but you can see some grain in the film image. So if you wanted to really match these, you could think about adding some grain. I probably would be conservative with the amount of grain that I add, but in this case, I'm actually not going to add any because I sort of stopped doing that, but it's something that you can do if you want to. So as I'm comparing these side by side, I just noticed that our film scan was lacking a little bit of contrast. One thing I like to do is sort of view these in full screen and just toggle between them. And this sometimes can help me get a better idea of what's happening. So as we do this, I feel like our digital image is slightly too warm and was just missing a little bit of contrast. So I brought that back a little bit. Okay, so I've just made a few additional tweaks to this because I think it's good to sort of like walk away and then come back and make more adjustments once your eyes have sort of had a chance to rest and come back. There's a lot that you see once you return to a photo, especially when you're film matching. That can be like really helpful. So I've just come back and I've made a few additional tweaks. So I'm just going to take you through the list and just talk through them. So here's where we are. So you can see they very much live in the same kind of color world. They feel like they belong in the same collection, which is ultimately the goal that I'm after. And so if we look at this digital photo, let's just go through here. Here's a before, after, before, after. So I want to make sure that the photo is living on its own, just like without seeing the film next to it. And it does, it looks great. Colors look beautiful. And you can see the settings here. So I've added the M6 profile at 60%. I've adjusted our temperature and tint. I've increased the exposure quite a bit because this image was slightly underexposed. I've lowered the contrast. I've adjusted highlights, shadows, whites, and left the blacks at 0, which sort of helps to even out the contrast here. I've added a little bit of texture and clarity. I've decreased the vibrance. I made a few small adjustments to the curves here, just further helping to cut some of the contrast. The color mixer is where I've isolated certain colors. So we've shifted the yellow hue, the orange slightly, and the red slightly. And that's mostly because of this background. It's sort of almost like a monochromatic with her skin tone and the wall sort of almost becoming the same tone. So it's a little bit challenging in that sense, but we have adjusted this slightly to more match the film scan. We've done the same with saturation, increasing yellows, but decreasing oranges and reds. And luminance, we've just dropped orange and yellow by a little bit. And in color grading, we've added some orange warmth to the shadows, just at 5% saturation. We've added a little bit of green to the midtones, just at 7 saturation. And we've added a little bit of this sort of magenta color to the highlights at 10. And that's sort of all we've done with the color grading. I leave all the details the same sort of like at default. And then we also enable profile corrections. But other than that, those are all the settings. So this is what we've done to this photo to bring it closer to film. I've been having a great experience with these Sony files. They're super easy to edit in Lightroom and the color is great. So I don't really have to do much to them other than everything I just showed you. But I feel like it's ultimately easy to get to this point. And like I said, the majority of what's happening is taking place in the basic panel with that profile and the basic adjustments. But this is sort of where we are. Film, digital, before, after. Let me know what you think about this video. I hope it was helpful, informative. If you have questions, leave them down below. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I'd love to see you at the next video. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.